Hi, everyone. This is John Brooks, Technical Director at Smile Vision. We are a custom dental laboratory where we help our clients get more and larger cases. Today, I've asked Dr. James McAnally, CEO of Big Case Marketing, to join us on a Smile Vision webinar because doctors are often confused about the simple steps they can and should take to have more success in the new dental economy. Dr. McAnally is an expert in marketing systems for dental practices. Good morning, Dr. McAnally.
Hey, good morning, John. Thanks for having me on. And one comment right away from what John said when he started today's talk is that Smile Vision Lab actually helps their clients find cases. You just never hear that from a lab. So I think that's a critical verbiage everyone should be aware of. But thanks for having me on the discussion today.
Okay, nice to have you. I'm going to start by asking you some questions about smile imaging and systems for selling dentistry in the dental practice. My first question for you is, how does imaging fit into a dental practice?
Well, from a standpoint of any practice that's really wanting to, first of all, sell not only basic dentistry, but certainly complex dentistry, they really have to be doing some sort of imaging. And for the folks listening, by the way, John did send me some questions in advance so I could prepare a few slides today so that we could have some things to actually look at. And, certainly when we think about imaging, how is a patient that looks like this going to understand, on the picture on the left, how are they going to understand what they're going to look like at the finish of treatment with their actual smile? So obviously in a case that is cosmetic, we certainly want to be doing imaging because there's just no way that patient's going to understand, what they're going to get at the end of treatment without that.
So what's the bottom line value of imaging?
Well, certainly if you want to have cases going forward, we've looked at this a number of ways. Certainly when I started putting imaging into my practice, 5, 6, 7 years ago, we instantly saw a dramatic increase in case acceptance. So the bottom line value is it's more dollars in practice, no doubt.
Okay. And should you image just full arches? How do you handle imaging in your practice?
Well, the truth is that anything that costs a significant amount of money, we need to be able to make simple for the patient to understand. And in a true fee-for-service practice, you start going down the list of services, and there aren't a whole lot of things that actually are cheap in a dental practice anymore. Time is an expensive thing in a dental practice, and therefore fees reflect the amount of time it takes to do procedures. So regardless of whether you're doing a quadrant of composites that are replacing amalgams, replacing a single tooth, treating serious perio, you're going to have resolution in the gum tissue. All of these things that cost significant amounts of money. So from that very standpoint, we should image any and all of those things if you want to have better case acceptance. And that is separate from even thinking about a cell system, which I think we'll probably go into in questions in a few minutes.
So how does imaging fit into patient decision making?
Well, when you think about the world we're living in fact, this is the reality right now. We're looking at what they call global information, meaning all of the stuff circulating in the knowledge base on planet Earth it's doubling every 18 months, which that it's mind-boggling. But what that says is that we're on a trajectory where complexity in all of our worlds are increasing. You probably will agree with me in this respect. Just from even the laboratories side of things, I'm guessing that your guys' complexity is rapidly increasing, and you're always fighting to say, okay, what do we pay attention to and what do we not pay attention to? Would that be correct?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So our patients and consumers are getting the same effect. And personally as a consumer, I'm being aware of it. I know what's happening. So from the standpoint of dealing with that complexity, I'm always looking for ways to simplify my decision making. And so that's what really is happening with the patient. And I'd like to I'm going to go out to the web for a second, and let's look at a couple of examples from some other industries, that maybe this will help drive the point home on why dentists should be doing imaging. You watch the web browser here, and you get all kinds of things. And certainly, cars are probably one of the best examples. And the truth of the matter is, and I took the time this morning to build a couple of cars that I think would look great here in Miami Beach. And is this what consumers are doing that are simplifying their decision making? They're building things on the web. They're looking at photos of stuff that they might buy. So in this particular example, I thought, hey, this little convertible BMW would look good here in South Florida. Built the whole thing out. Now I can see what it looks like, from all the photographs. Certainly very, very complex simulations going on here. Far more complex than even what we're doing with dental simulations. And the price tag, the end point there. Of course, you can't quite do that with the dental simulation, since there's more to it than that. But $43,000 for that car, and there are plenty of dental treatments. I've sold dental treatment plans, and many of our clients have sold dental treatment plans that are, double the price of this car. So if you think about that with what you're selling with complex dentistry, you really should show the patient what you're going to get. And it's not just BMWs. I mean, Fiat, the Italian car maker, is about to put in a car back in the American market. And here's the model they're bringing over, and same thing. You can go over and build it, $18,000. Well, again, there are plenty of dental treatment plans that involve $20,000 with the dentistry. In fact, that's, you step into a practice, a true advanced practice that has, implant treatment going on, any kind of cosmetics in the anterior region. You're gonna find most treatment plans bumping up into those numbers. Certainly, I told around that, I have a scooter now, but rode many motorcycles over the course of my life, and plenty of places that you can go look at your motorcycle. In this case, you don't really build them, but you download screensavers. So if you're not building it, you're downloading something to look at. So that's how the consumer is navigating expensive things in a simple manner to see what they're getting. Now we go over in the medical purview, and Bosley Hair is one of my favorite companies to observe from a marketing and sales standpoint, because what's more elective than teeth? Well, hair. None of us need our hair, but we certainly like to have hair. And so Bosley is very good at doing a lot of the exact same things we teach, with showing the consumer. I guess you would call someone who's getting their hair restored a patient as well. You're going to have this opportunity to upload your image and show yourself with hair. So again, you look at price points of what hair transplants cost, or hair transplantation surgeries, and we're back into the same range as dentists. And of course, on the site, you also see all kinds of other great things that most dentists could learn from. So those are some examples of exactly how we're trying to reduce complexity by things just like imaging.
How about the doctor or staff doing this service?
Well, and in fact, the last little photo there was there's an image of some implants that I did a number of years ago, and any dentist that's been around the implant world can understand very quickly there was a lot of complexity that went into reaching this point where the restoration was about to be cemented, from the beginning to that point. And there's no reason that any of that complexity needed to really enter the patient's world. We just needed to tell them and show them what they would look like at the end of treatment. As far as doctor or staff doing this imaging, let's be honest here, your time is way too valuable for that. You need to really think about how much time you have available in a week and where it's best spent. And it's best, if anything, that time's better spent on learning a sales system, sitting down and actually managing your marketing, those kinds of things, versus sitting there and screwing around with photo drawing softwares. Now, if you're very skilled at that, then certainly if you have outside imaging service such as Smile Vision do your imaging, yes, you can tweak it when it comes back if you're really that retentive. But by and large, most patients aren't going to care. So that the truth of the matter is that it's really a very low priority kind of a task that really shouldn't be being done in the practice itself.
Very similar to the laboratory work. I know of dentists that like to sit down and do their own laboratory work.
Exactly. There was a casting well in my former practice. There was a casting well when I first took it over. One of the first things I ripped out. I'm like, what are we going to do with a casting well? Nothing.
Yeah. How does this fit into a system for selling dentistry?
Well, one of the things that I think a lot of dentists in particular, because we don't attend business schools, is that they have a hard concept of, understanding what a system really is. And the truth of the matter is they've learned many, many, many systems already in their practices, and the majority of those are, of course, clinical. As an example, I pulled some stuff off of your guys' website, showing us, a system for how you can deliver predictable anterior aesthetic cosmetic dentistry. Very simple. In fact, I've used this technique that you guys developed a few times, and it does just exactly what you say. But it's a system of how you get from the photograph on the left side of the screen to the end result on the right-hand side of the screen. So think about systems as being the stepwise process that gets you to the desired result, and that's exactly what all of these things do in your practice clinically. So when we think about tying imaging into a selling system, we need to think about what are stepwise processes that build sales systems in dental offices. And I've tried to I've got two diagrams of this, and this one is certainly the more simplistic of the two. And when we think about cases coming into our practice, especially ones that we're getting via marketing, we really have activity that's occurring outside the practice, which is marketing. It's generating interest from patients with the types of needs that we're interested in, and they start calling the practice and certainly finding out whether this is the right situation for them as a patient. And of course, we know that all occurs by phone, email, web forms, any kind of mechanism of contact in the practice. Well, our imaging services are going to happen somewhere in the front part of our sales process, meaning that if they're coming in for either a free visit or for their diagnostics, we're going to have the imaging at the front stage of this. So when we think about the stepwise process from that first phone call through appointment where they might be just saying hello to the doctor to a diagnostic appointment to a case presentation, and after the presentation to actually treatment starting at the end of our system, we think about where would that particular component fit into the sales process, and that's how we think about any of these things, whether it's imaging or other things. And I know in a bit we'll talk a little bit more about more parts of the sales process.
Well, I was just going to say, how about going into some detail, giving us an overview of a systematic sales process? What does it look like?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you think about this diagram being very simplistic, we have patients coming into practice. We obviously have staff involved with how they interact with the patient in the beginning of the sales process, what happens at these consultations. There's all kinds of dirty details that go on into building a stepwise process for how you actually sell dentistry, and ethically sell dentistry, I might add, because that's really what we're getting at anytime we're thinking of quote, selling in a practice. And here are just a few of those items that really sit inside a systematic sales process. Certainly you have your team being trained all the time. It's not a one-time component to the practice. It's never-ending and ongoing, especially with phone skills. There are definite things about how much time elapses between appointments in a practice, how many days are reasonable between a free visit and a paid diagnostic visit and a case presentation. How much time should lapse between those? And there are answers to those questions. Why, as part of your system, why would anyone pick you over another doctor? Why are you more of an expert than someone else? That has to be built in to the system and what you present to the patient as they look at your practice from the outside, as well as what they see inside the practice. That lends to the physical space. What should happen when they come in? What should the room look like that they sit in to have their diagnostics in? What should the room look like that they have their case presentation in? We know that there's certain types of patients running around, and there really are fewer types than most dentists understand. But we're only dealing with really a few types of individuals out there, no matter what country we live in and what economic strata we live in. So those are things that we need to be aware of as far as the selling process. Managing those patients' expectations, and what they can expect at any given visit. Pre-consultations, diagnostics, that's all very important as well. What technology to use. Again, a lot of dentists, we get very pulled into this technology thing of believing that more is always better, and that's not always the case. There are certain parts of our technology that patients really could care less about, and other things that are very helpful to them. And by and large, any technology that simplifies our discussions are ones that are real winners in the dental office. Now, how do we deal with financial decision makers and avoiding surprises in that category? If you don't have a system for that, I can guarantee you that your acceptance rates are lower than they should be. I can also guarantee that your fees are lower than they should be, which brings us to fee staging and framing. People people are always fearful of discussion. Many are fearful of discussion of fees with patients, and really shouldn't be that way at all. In fact, we should be more forthcoming earlier in our sales process, so that some patients who really shouldn't be interacting with us don't, so that they don't waste our time. Buyer's remorse can happen, especially the bigger the transaction is, the more expensive a buyer's remorse situation is. We want to take action that prevents that. Second opinions, how do you deal with that? Family and friends discussions that are certainly going to go on outside of your practice. As dentists, we want to believe that the entire world revolves around our little environment there at the office, but the truth is we're just a tiny little speck of that, and lots of discussions that aren't necessarily helpful to the patient or to the practice are going to go on outside of it. We've got to manage those as part of a systematic approach as well. Protecting our time investments for how much time we're putting into treatment, how we deal with warranties and how that affects the sales process, and of course appropriate discounting. Notice I put appropriate because discounting by itself is worthless, but when it's done in appropriate manners, it can have some very significant effects. And speaking of, if that list of things sounds complete, I pulled together. We're putting on a case acceptance summit in the near future that people can contact us about. Where if they really want to learn a systematic approach, we'll be teaching that. And these are just, this is just a snapshot of the 2 days of all the details we're going to go over with systematic and ethical selling in a practice. So I guess that would be certainly an overview, and maybe a little more than an overview of what that really involves if we're thinking about fitting imaging as well as many other details into systematic selling.
I'm wondering if the systematic selling affects fees.
Well, absolutely. The reality is that the only way you're going to get an appropriate fee for your treatment consistently is if you have a well-thought-out process of how you walk a patient through the buying decision-making and positioning that buying decision in ways that make sense from how people purchase and the actual amounts that they will purchase. There are lots of behavioral things in the science that help us out with this, and that we're all going to pretty much do it in a similar fashion when we're making buying decisions as consumers. So the truth matters, if you're ignoring those things, you really sort of dropping the ball ethically, because the patients aren't going to make as good a decision, and that's really what this was all about.
Huh. That's fascinating stuff. Does selling at appropriate fees affect practice administration?
Well, it does. There's an old saying, that you would hear this, and it's actually kind of an old, tired saying, just because of the fact that people would never have an explanation after the saying, which is, charge what you're worth, or you become worth what you charge. Well, that's also great, and that expression has probably been around in dentistry for 30, 40 years. Who knows who said it first? But the problem is that they leave off after it what you have to do in order to sell at what the levels you're worth, and it's far more than being able, than just setting that price at that point. Because again, consumers need to understand why they're paying a certain price for services. But so if we are having a systematic sales process, selling at the right fees, we can actually operate the practice in ways that make a lot more sense. We have a number of types of clients. Everything from multi-doctor practices with lots of associates as one model, down to the other type of practice, which I would say is the lean and mean, or the Bill Blatchford model, so to speak, where it's one doctor working 3 days a week. But you basically see all of these practices being operated much more efficiently, and the owner is much happier if they can sell at the right fees, because now the business routine and the administration of practice is operated at the level of what the dentist is really worth. When you go the opposite extreme, where the practice is barely making ends meet as a discounting practice, and then it's just the opposite, and everyone's miserable. The dentist hates his job, hates being a dentist, which is really unfortunate in this age we live in, when it's so amazing with the technology we have. So the appropriate fees that are a component of selling correctly really make a difference in the practice administration as well.
Well, yeah, it's a slippery slope. Once people start heading down, start lowering fees, certainly. How does this systematic selling fit into marketing and apply to the types of patients presenting to the practice?
Well, the truth of the matter is most dentists should start with learning the sales process first before they start throwing lots of money into marketing. And the reason I say that is because usually at the point where you're showing up to learn something like that, you already have an existing practice and you have patients in the practice already. So just learning to be more efficient with your sales process with existing patients is incredibly important because if you start throwing lots and lots of money at marketing without having a process for those patients to interact with the practice that's most beneficial for you and for them, you're going to waste a lot of money. But when you are marketing for specific types of patients, so as here at Big Case Marketing, most of our clients are looking for what we call deep disability patients, meaning highly fearful, those missing their teeth, those with just serious, significant amounts of dentistry that needs to be done. And whichever niche you are targeting as far as those patients with serious needs, we want to have the sales process built for that kind of patient. So if they're a serious needs patient, you're going to have a sales process specifically for that complex type of patient, which infinitely helps out better with arriving at the destination, which is getting this 50 to 70%. We've actually had a few practices bump up to 90% case acceptance rates just because they adhered so well to the sales process model. And of course, the more you navigate away from that, then your acceptance rates dwindle down. But if you're thinking about cases that are $10,000-$20,000 and more, and you're getting this kind of acceptance rate, that's much better than anyone ever dreamed we would be having in our practices.
And how about the patients that are already in the practice?
Well, when you think about, we teach this as part of the ethical selling system. When you think about patients that are sitting in a practice, there are going to be some patients there who do need their dentistry upgraded. It needs a quadrant of amalgams replaced with onlays. Their teeth structurally are aging out, and they need the dentistry. Well, you have to have methods of getting those patients back to the beginning of a sales process versus just suddenly springing a surprise on them of, hey, guess what, Mrs. Jones, you need $15,000 worth of dentistry, even though the last 10 years all I've ever talked to you about is a pro fee. So you need a mechanism where you take those patients that are in the practice and run them through a similar sales process that helps them make a decision as well. And we can give them easy choices so they can either qualify themselves as saying, yes, I'm ready, doctor, to talk about these more advanced procedures, and they're going to be ready to talk about them via our systematic sales process, not their random decision-making process. So patients sitting in a practice, we want to think about them from a standpoint of them not knowing that much about dentistry, even though they've been there for a very long time. So this is something we often forget because we're so close to these patients, they first name basis and all that kind of stuff. But so you have to sort of back away from that and really think about, well, they do need to walk through a sales process, just like a patient who just called the practice from the marketing line today.
Huh. Fascinating. I wanted to move on now and talk about the sales and marketing programs and talk about looking at return on investment. Dentists like to talk a lot about return on investment, but few of them seem to understand it. Can you help shed some light on this?
Yeah, and actually, I think one of the things I put together today, John, is we're for the dentists who wind up listening to this presentation today, they're going to be so much more informed on return on investment than any of their peers, and it's going to be so enlightening because we finally got this in a simplified approach where everyone can finally understand what's important to look at with return on investment. And certainly, one of the first things that you have to do with return on investment is figure out, okay, we've got to do some measuring first, simply because how do you even know what to measure return on if you're not measuring? And in a moment, we're going to go on into an actual piece of information that a client had sent us recently that this is not for their big case marketing, but this is purely for their general practice marketing. And we're going to talk about some of these numbers in a minute. Specifically, the question was about their Chris ad results. And we'll come back to that because, almost every dentist is familiar with Chris ad. But I want to actually buzz out to the web again real quick, and we can close my dream motorcycle, dream convertible, and my I'm not sure I would dream about the Fiat, but it's kind of a cool car for 20 grand, and certainly I could use the Bosley hair transplantation, but I don't quite have time right now to let Dr. Bosley do my hair by himself, and he will come out of retirement, by the way, and do your transplant if you want to put up the dough. So, okay, and so what I'd like to do before we actually go further with the return on investment discussion is actually go out to an example of how we really measure what's happening, so we can really calculate return on marketing investment. And what we're looking at on this screenshot is is actually the back end of our measuring service for phone calls with our big case marketing clients, which actually I blocked their names out because they certainly would not want their names being shown to be potential competitors seeing what's happening. But this is showing measuring, and so our top client, with all the marketing that he has going on and the marketing around his practice, over 3,000 phone calls to date through today's recording date for marketing, purely marketing-based phone calls coming to the practice. So these are not existing patients calling the practice. These are new patients with serious problems calling the practice. And interestingly enough, the second highest call volume is another program member, of course, nearly 2,000 phone calls in the exact opposite style of practice. The first doctor has a multi-doctor associate-based practice, very, very busy, lots of staff, those kinds of things. And the second doctor is an example of the lean and mean Bill Blatchford type model. In fact, was a consulting client of Bill's for several years, and very lean and mean operation, just practices a few days a week, not that many staff, but yet still utilizing measurement systems to look at where the phone calls are coming from, which marketing venues are working best, and then also, of course, the other side of this that is a big bonus to those doctors that are staying lean and mean is this is an efficiency model too. So now you're leveraging your existing staff more by having the ability to take more phone calls via a system such as this. And of course, some of our other top clients are. My name is not blocked out because everyone knows. I have no problem with you knowing how many phone calls we've gotten this year to Big Case Marketing, over 1,200, inquiring about our products, programs, and services. So that is an example of measuring. And then if we go into the lower pie chart, we can actually look at how many marketing phone calls came in to all of our clients, over 15,000 this year. And again, those are not existing patient phone calls; those are brand new patients calling dental practices all over the country. So then, as a component of this, which we can also go into for just a second, and that is not only are these doctors measuring, but they're also inspecting. And again, we've covered up the doctors' names on this slide, but we have all phone calls coming in. Of those 15,000 phone calls are also recorded. So the critical thing with this is that before we get into discussions again about how we get to this point where we know how many patients came from a marketing venue, we've got to attach mechanisms of tracking. And again, in the past, classically, that was done by just purely paper mechanisms and remembering from the staff standpoint, which often gets pushed to the side. So this kind of measurement system lends itself to doing that kind of monitoring so that we can really calculate true return on investment. And again, this was an example sent in from one of our clients. I'm not really sure which one, but this was purely new from the general practice side of the business, where patients were coming from and had a question about ChrisAd return on investment. So we sent back this exact discussion that you're getting on here today, which is probably going to be more enlightening again than anything you've ever had discussed before with return on investment. And classically you hear this kind of stuff thrown around out there. What's the return? 3-to-1, 4-to-1, 2-to-1. What's going on? And so that's the kind of language that you constantly hear in the profession. And the reality is that this really is an oversimplification because there are missing components in thinking about return purely as I spent X amount of dollars and it produced X amount of dollars. What we're really concerned about and should always be concerned about is what's left over, what's the profit, and then off of the profit, what's the real return on what we spent to get that profit. So really the problem with this is classic return on investment leaves out the overhead of the practice, because overheads are all over the place. We have some practices operating at 45, 50%, believe it or not, because they can sell at the right fees, and other practices that they're getting eaten alive, 95% overhead, which is a nightmare. So the overheads are all over the map, which really doesn't help with figuring out what's the true return on marketing investment. And also, this classic model of return on investment, it left out the fact that you had to put money into the marketing to begin with. So that money had to move from somewhere else in the practice to go into the marketing. By the way, those doctors who are on this presentation who get information from us at Big Case Marketing, you're going to find us talking in these terms because we have to do it that way because the average dentist is not prepared for the conversation we're having right now. So you're going to find us talking about returns of 10 to 1 to 40 to 1, depending on which program, which marketing strategy they're using that we provide. And unfortunately, we have to do it that way because, again, dentists are trained to think about ROI in these terms. Now, we got this oversimplification model, which really is incorrect, and everyone on this presentation today will now know forever how to really calculate return in a few moments. And then we have the other side of the equation, which is really more consumer products or widgets. And even at the laboratory level, I would have no doubt that in your MBA program, John, you guys went into some pretty detailed mechanisms of having a better grasp on return in more of a product-based business. And so with consumer products or widgets, return on marketing investment is far more sophisticated than what we need to do in dental practices, but because we actually have profitability of individual types of products that are being produced in these businesses, there's revenue, there's bumps in revenue that happen based on the marketing having incurred, which is also part of the calculation. You have baseline sales calculations without any marketing because you want to know about that in a widget business as well. And then you have something called marginal contribution, or how much more did it cost to produce the next widget because marketing created the need to produce the next widget. If this sounds pretty complex, it is. But when you're running a factory or running something that's making widgets, you go down to this detail and you have smart people measuring these things. Now, in dentistry, we don't need to go to that level, but we do need to be more sophisticated than the simple classic 3 to 1, 4 to 1 method. And so the really best way to look at return on marketing investment in dental practice is the net profit that occurs from the marketing divided by the investment times 100, which gives us a percent return. And, of course, net profit is going to be actual profit from the actual production coming from the marketing that was done. So if you're doing implant marketing and it produced X amount of production and we know the overhead is a certain amount, then we know that the profit is what's left over minus the marketing investment. So now we've taken that initial expenditure of capital that we spent on the marketing into account as part of the equation, because that's important to think about as well. So again, if we look at that from a formula, it's dollars profit minus dollars marketing over dollars marketing times 100, and that gives us our percent. So let's go back to that example. So again, this is a very general practice kind of a question. Again, there are going to be people on this phone call that's probably what their reality looks like versus someone who's seeking complex cases. So we have this ChrisSat example, and the question was, the last 2 years I spent all this money, 25 G's, $25,000 on ChrisSat. What has it done? Well, last year it brought in, almost $60,000 in production. This year it's brought in only $30,000 in production. And of course, that drop is probably sending some warning signals to the dentist, and it should be. And actually, somewhere earlier in 2010, it probably should have set off really big flares that would have caused a change in course of action. But at this point, they're asking this a little late in the year, but I'm sure they're making a decision on what I've sent back on what to do about the ChrisSat thing. Now, when you're thinking about this, most dentists will already see, okay, if I spent 25 G's and got 30 G's back, well, that's probably not quite acceptable. Maybe 58, probably acceptable. But we should look at this from an actual rational standpoint. So we're going to do it via this formula that we just went over. And and as one more side note of return on marketing investment, for a general practice patients, if you know that in the second year of the patient or the third year of the patient being in the practice that the amount of production is going to be significantly greater because they stay around in the practice longer, then there are times where it's even actually worth going negative to acquire those patients, meaning that we spend more to get the patient than it brings in immediately. And that's of course, very, very advanced thinking, and it it takes a well-run practice that's making a good profit in order to do that. But there are times where that makes sense, but for most dentists, it does not. So let's attack this and look at return on investment on this example. So we got our formula, and we know that. And in this, we're going to assume I actually don't know the overhead of this practice and sent the information in, but we're going to assume it's 50%, which is probably not true. So that's why I put the ha-ha. Very few practices are selling at the fees that they need to in order to have 50% overhead these days. But in 2009, we know that marketing expense created about $58,000 in change in the business, leaving $29,000 in profit. We know the return on this is profit minus marketing investment over marketing investment times 100, and essentially that was a 20% return on what it took to create the dentistry. Now again, in a slow boat to China general practice, where we know that these patients are going to stay around for 20 years, that makes complete sense from that standpoint. If the turnover in the practice is a lot, and you're replacing patients, the patient base every couple of years, that probably doesn't make sense. There are probably other ways I won't say probably, there are other ways to spend much less than $25,000 to create that amount of dentistry. Now, we look at 2010, which of course earlier I said the light bulb should have been going off or the fire alarm sounding or something should have been happening. At 50% overhead, again, and that 25,000 only created 30,000 in business, and that means 15,000 in profit. But unfortunately, it's going to have cost 25,000 on the front end of this to create that 15,000 in profit. So in essence, we are underwater with the patients that came from this venue in 2010. So $10,000 net loss, which turns out to be a negative 40% return. So again, there are going to be some situations. Let's say we knew that those same patients were going to become full mouth reconstructions in a year. Well, of course, going negative to get those patients would be more than worth it. But for a ChrisAd general practice patient, not a good deal. So in this case, they should scratch this mechanism of getting patients, find something that would do the same thing for less expense. That in I guess a very long-winded nutshell, moving past the general practice patients, just so some of the folks listening to this can also think about this from a larger case production standpoint. Because the truth of the matter is, if you really want big cases, you're going to have to spend big dollars to get them. But the point of that discussion is that it's not so much how much was spent, but how much profit is returned to the practice. So this is where you get into very advanced thinking that only the dentists who get this kind of advanced thinking will ever have practices that do these larger cases. But essentially, if we're thinking about, let's say, a $25,000 marketing investment yielded $125,000 in production, and the overhead much more realistic, 60%, we know that $50,000 left in profit, and the return on that was 100%. So that makes sense to do as, we do that until the cows come home, so to speak. You can continue to make that kind of marketing investment at 100% return over and over and over. And so, in fact, at a baseline, with any of the marketing we recommend or provide in our programs, it has to be a minimum this kind of return to make sense, just because of the fact that the risk is so much higher when we're doing more advanced cases. Now, you take this to a entire practice-wide kind of a thinking where you spend $100,000 in marketing, which most dentists are going to fall off their seat thinking that they would spend that much in a year. But if you spent that much and yield $1 million in production at 60% overhead, the profit is $400,000, and of course that's a 300% return. Again, do that till the cows come home all day long. If you've got the time to treat the patients coming from that amount of marketing to create that much production, this is a no-brainer. But yet most dentists can never get past the point of, okay, I've got to spend more and more on my marketing to create more business. They just don't get that equation. And by the way, these last numbers, this was really the last couple of years of my private practice where I was only there for a couple of days a week. This was the scenario. I was spending about 100 G's a year to create my $1 million in production of a very part-time practice. And again, most dentists would fall off their chair saying, why would you do that? Well, if you look at $1 million practice that's insurance-based, the odds are the write-offs in the practice are $200,000 a year. So in essence, they've spent $200,000. They didn't even get to spend the $200,000. They took that, on the chin to have that production from those insurance patients. So this is very advanced kind of thinking, but I think it's worthy of putting out there for everyone. And especially, when we get away from the widget factory, that more advanced, example of making sure the marketing dollars are included with the return equation. It's just critical for every business. But of course, dentists want to feel that their model is somehow different from everyone else out there, but it really isn't.
I wanted to get back to you a question about being able to actually track where patients come from. How are you able to do that in your system?
Well, so, and I've got a second graphic here, which, of course, is far, a bit more complex than the first one. Again, sort of marching through thinking about a systematic sales process, if I can get my pointer back. And essentially, when you're getting all these phone calls, you've got your universe of patients out there, which, by the way, last count, I've given up even thinking about trying to keep up with the current number, but just in the U.S., there are 50 million patients missing posterior teeth in two fourth quadrants. So you got, just a ton of patients missing teeth. And so all of the marketing you do to create those phone calls, each one of the phone calls should come through a line that actually tracks back through a computer system so that you can go online, look at the total calls from any particular marketing venue, and then, of course, inspect what your staff are saying and train, because that makes a big difference. But that's how, in a simplistic overview, how you really track.
Are there any other giant gaping holes in most practices related to this?
Absolutely, and the big one is, in fact, this diagram, probably one of the key things to look at, a couple of key things is certainly, yes, when we're selling systematically, we're getting that appropriate case acceptance rate. But one of the things to look at is on the left-hand side of the screen, and actually this should be revised. One of the interesting things was a lot of the numbers in original systems were developed out of my personal practice, and then practices of other doctors, and so we would see this range of success rates. Like if 100 patients called the office, we know that 3 to 7 of those patients, depending on the skill of the practice, would go forward with significant treatment. We're not talking about a crown here or there. We're talking about a full mouth of treatment, and right away that should set up some instant ahas for people to say, oh my gosh, if it's really only 3 to 7%, then we really got to be good at having a system to find the people who are going to say no. And unfortunately, that 7% is actually bumped up. We've seen that go up to 9.5% now, in some of our member practices. So now that they've got up to a 10% chance of someone needing a full mouth of care going forward. Well, the gaping hole in all of this is all of these no's that are left over. And if you go into most practices, and all the people who've ever said no to something, usually they just, the practice has heard the no and they move on to someone else. Well, the no's need to continue to be talked to over time. In fact, probably a suggestion for some of our members would be to actually have on all of their follow-up materials, and I'm actually making a note of this right now, when they're doing all of their follow-up mailings, they should have a special no phone line, which means that over the course of years, you can actually see how many of the no's come back to convert on into treatment. When I say convert, I mean they say yes. Because of the course of time, if you keep talking to these no's, you're going to have more of them eventually go into treatment. Life changes. People make major moves. Something happens. Someone dies. Someone divorces. Someone gets married. Someone comes into money. Someone comes into business success. You've got all these factors going on. If you've got thousands of patients that you've marketed to over the years, the value of that pool of patients is immense. But you have to keep talking to them. So that's a gaping hole in most practices. They'll say, "Oh, yeah, we never got around to that." Well, they're throwing away long-term marketing results by ignoring those patients that have come in that way.
But all this does require time, follow-up and everything. How much time should the doctor or a qualified person spend on marketing activities?
Certainly the nuts and bolts of all of the to-dos are not a doctor thing. You have to be realistic here. It is a staff thing. You have to be hiring the right staff for that. You have to train the staff, and it's all part of running the business. Any practice that's running at a high level of competency, you're seeing that in those practices. Now, from a standpoint of doctor time focused on marketing and sales systems, you've got to allot a percentage of the time. And I think, and that's just the truth of the way the week has to evolve. And I think actually one of the best examples I recently interacted with, and I don't know how many people will know this guy, but that's Richard Branson. He's one of the richest men on planet Earth. He started Virgin record label back in the 70s. Of course, now he owns airlines and all kinds of stuff. I just saw where he's about to start a hotel chain. Very smart, business savvy guy. So you think at that level, he must probably not do much with his marketing anymore, right? Well, when I ask about how he really spends his time from a business perspective, he's fighting fires 10% of the time. We all fight fires 10% of the time. It doesn't matter what business you're in. You've got some fires that have to be put out. Probably not you, John, though, right?
Oh, no.
No. So, and he spends about 40% of his time on his charity, Virgin Unite, which actually, at the business meeting I was at where I met Richard, we were also attending his charity, which was fantastic to go to. But he spends 40% of his time on that because he feels it's important. 20% of the time is dealing with management issues in the businesses, and still 25% is looking at how they're doing their marketing. And so you think about this. Here's a guy, 212th richest guy in the world, and he's still doing that. Now, that's not because he's got more time than the rest of us, but it's because he realizes how important that is to the growth of his business entities. And so that's really how we have to look at it in our practice. If a dental practice, if the doctor is not focusing on at least overseeing and directing the marketing 20%, 25% of the time, or at least splitting those numbers between marketing and sales system training, I can guarantee that the practice is going to stay stuck in the last insurance-driven last century model. They're never going to go forward with being really good at using all the technologies available. It's just not going to happen. So that, you learn from Richard Branson, apply that back to your practice.
Very nice. Well, I'd like to talk now about the laboratories and the relationship between the dentist and the laboratory. How should doctors think about their lab relationship?
Well, the way that I've always looked at a lab relationship is you really have different needs in the practice based on what you're doing with lab-oriented procedures and the labs that you use. Now, certainly, for simple lab procedures where you're doing, single crowns, that kind of thing, there are labs that are specialized in doing that are going to be in your local market that you really should have a good relationship with, so that there's a speed relationship there. When you move on into things that are more complex, the risk goes up. So you want to have situations where the lab is proven with being able to handle complex, multi-step cases that are well thought out, well designed, well executed from start to finish. So that's how you have to think about the two differences. And so it really comes back to the simplicity of the dentistry versus complex dentistry. Now, the problem with not understanding the difference between these two things is you get some dentists that are only used to selling single-tooth dentistry starting to do more complex cases, and they don't understand that the case fee itself has to drive their ability to choose the right lab. So if you aren't selling at the right fees, and then suddenly you're trying to use a premium lab that would actually handle the case well, now you've got a problem with the overhead of the model. Not only do you have a problem with the overhead of the case, but now you've got a case that's going to come back that's probably not done as well. And now you've got all kinds of issues with that, where you're going to babysit the case as it spirals downward over many years. And so that's really the issue you get with the discounting side of the equation. I know also a lot of dentists are getting interested in CEREC in their office. I have some opinions on that. Certainly it has some interesting applications for a few teeth and an arch, that kind of thing, where you can market it specifically for that. But again, moving past a couple of teeth into a complex case, CEREC's not going to cut it. And not only that, but we're dealing with, again, what's the value of your time, all of those kinds of equations. I would hate for dentists to be doing CEREC simply because it allows them not to sell at appropriate fees. So, really, you get a lot of dentists say, gosh, I wish I could use a better lab, when the reality is they're not investing in the practice ability to sell at the right fee. So they go back to blame the patient, paying a low fee, or blaming the insurance company, and those kind of things, when they could use any lab they wished if they were selling at the right.
Practices need to watch expenses. What should be priorities for expenses in dental offices?
Well, right now, one of the biggest things that practitioners should be very, very aware of, and that is new equipment. Certainly new equipment and costs. I mean, there's certainly a technology component that does need to be upgraded as time goes by, but there are a lot of things running around that are very costly. In fact, in the implant world, cone beam CTs items. That these kind of major equipment expenditures without a real justification can suck away all the money needed to put into marketing. So you remember from our earlier equations, you still have to, if you're going to take $100,000 in out of the bank account over a year and create $1 million in dentistry, you still got to have the $100,000 there. And if that's getting eaten up by expensive equipment leases, guess who can't put the money into the marketing? Well, there you go. But you get to have a great cone beam. So that's the kind of thing you have to think about. And then beyond that, just excessive debt in any practice right now is something you should really be concerned about. Again, because we're in some strange times, which there are a lot of fundamentals that are really wrong with the economics in Western economies right now. That they're really all of us looking at all the information coming through the news reports and all these different things. It doesn't look great from the long-term perspective. What that means is we got to sell more efficiently and be great at selling. And so if you have a lot of debt, you can't really adapt to what's happening around you. So that's a big one. And last but not least, I wouldn't say so much about expenses, but that is back to being able to have appropriate fees regardless of the economic circumstances around the practice, and being able to sell at those fees. Those things really are some of the most critical things to be watching right now.
I know in the laboratory industry, for instance, we look at new technology, real thoroughly. I mean, in essence, it's just a tool to getting the job done, and how that fits into our price structure and how it's going to help efficiency and whatnot. It goes beyond just the whiz-bang of the technology itself, how cool it is or how neat it looks, certainly.
Yeah. And many times a technology that the dentist will adopt early and fast is something that the patient really could care less about and doesn't impact sales whatsoever. So those are, those very important things.
Sure. I'm going to move on to talking about a consumer choice. And the information age has changed the world. What are some major differences you're seeing in consumer behavior?
Well, one of the things that I'm going to go back out to the web here real quick, and we'll close that. One of the things that we're seeing in consumer behavior is the use of research online. I mean, everyone does it. As most people may or may not know, I recently relocated to the East Coast for business reasons, and one of the things that I found my behavior doing much differently since the last time I moved was how much you really use the online world to do research about all kinds of stuff. Where you're going to get your tires changed, where you're going to get your dentistry done. Of course, as an example would be dry cleaning. Anything that you're going to reestablish a service of any kind, you're going to start doing research on the web. And some of those major searches that are going on when we're looking at what's happening. Patients are saying dentist, New York City scam. They're doing stuff like that. They're finding out, oh look, see, this place is a total scam. Union Square Dental, Flatiron, New York, New York. Here's someone that said scam. They're closed. So the patients are. Oh look, dentist who scam Medicaid. Patients are putting in dentist review, dentist scam. They're looking for things to make decisions on in the online world, and so that's a big deal. Now, the other thing that I pulled up, I did a little quick search of myself, even misspelled my name incorrectly, but we'll come back to this in a minute. But patients are looking for these kind of testimonials on the web about the practice, and we go over and look at some of the other reviews that you might find. So like I just did a search here in Miami Beach, my new hometown, and you see someone here with a lot of reviews. So that's kind of interesting. We'll go look at that. Here's those reviews on the site. Now, first of all, what do you think is more powerful? The reviews that are all more detail-oriented, or the reviews that are, oops, looks like I canceled it there. But anyway, the reviews that are more generic. Well, like this one, you can see a lot of these are very one-liner reviews, et cetera, which aren't great. So you want to think about that from a review standpoint, something that every practice should be doing. That is how patients are looking online.
What else is important to understand about the research phase patients are conducting?
Well, the other part of it is when they are looking online and they're going to your practice website, they're looking for being able to understand, hey, I've got this problem. I understand that this is a solution. Now, who can really tell me about that solution in simple terms? You go to most websites, and they're so technically oriented because they're the dentist deciding what goes on the site from their dental eye and their dental thinking. So you get this very complex site that really just doesn't resonate with the patient. Yeah, it's got a lot of good technical information. It's very understandable as a dentist, but that's about it. The other side of it is we want to go back to that. We go back to that earlier thing where I said that the global information overload is doubling every 18 months. So think about that from a patient's perspective. If they're seeing more and more complexity, they want simpler and simpler things. So those kind of things all need to be thought about as far as how you are putting information out on the web for your patients.
How about social media? How does this fit into the equation?
Well, another topic that I think one of the things, maybe a statement to say about social media, much as Mark Twain wrote that he was amused to find that the announcement of his death was greatly over-exaggerated, and that he had not died. It was just a rumor. Well, the chatter that's going on out there about how valuable social media is for dental practice is greatly overstated, pretty much. Is it something that's interesting and that it does create connections? Yes, it does. Is it driving a lot of patients into practices? No, it's not. You go onto the social sites and there's so many things happening. There's more distraction there than anything else. Now, if someone really wants to leverage social media from a dental practice standpoint as much as you can, which again will currently not replace any of your other marketing, and that is your employees and your staff, you want to make sure that on their Facebook pages they're talking about your practice. So that way you're expanding your reach by word of mouth that way, because your employees are going to have friends that are going to need the dentist. But outside of that, most of this stuff, of course we have pages at Facebook, et cetera, where we maintain an active presence so people can find us from a business standpoint. But by and large, you're not seeing a flood of patients from this. So it's really you can waste a whole lot of time and get very little result for it. So that's the current state with the social media.
And what would you say is important to understand about the live and in-person meetings in the office when the patients do come in for consultations, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, let's think about. We'll run back to my slide here. So when you think about, a sales process that's happening. We just were on the web. You've got all this stuff out there floating around. Marketing and offline media, marketing online. It's driving patients in the office. Well, suddenly now you've got a live body in your office. Now, I guess the good and the bad for the widget makers and people who just sell online, et cetera, they never have to actually see the customer live in person yet. We're going to be very intimate with them. So when the patient comes in and we got live interaction now, then sort of the rubber is hitting the road, so to speak. And in those situations, we now have to be prepared to carry over that simplicity and understanding into the practice. And most practices do a very bad job of that. And the reason being, because they just never gone through learning a sales process that teaches them just how to do that. So once again, if you sort of lucked into the patient coming in and then you still talk in very complex terms to them, you're going to have less success. So again, we have to carry forward all of that simplification and being able to convey understanding to our patients, whether it's by conversation with our staff, with the doctor, or via technology that simplifies. That all has to come into play at the live and in person. And I know that we're probably just almost out of our time today, John. But I did want to pull up one other slide, which is just a little thing showing all these little X's, showing all parts of the world where our case acceptance and ethical selling training is working in the world. And the truth of the matter is that it's this kind of discussion we've had today. The point of this is that having systems, selling systems, work everywhere. And so the dentist shouldn't be afraid of that. They should embrace it, the fact that it works everywhere, and want to put that into use.
Well, that's it for our time right now. Dr. McAnally, this has been a very, very interesting and enlightening discussion for me personally, and I'm sure for many of our viewers as well.
Absolutely. So, there's always some free materials at our websites, and of course, again, we always have something live coming up at a given time, and for doctors who are really ready to invest, anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000 in a year in their practice, then they're the right kind of doctor who should be talking to us, Big Case Marketing.